starring all of our YouTube fans, starring Alfred Muller as the Bull, starring the Funky Fantasy Man as Nathan Helm, and Stratoceros as Ryan Morgan. On this week's episode of Smallville Review. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the War of Nerds podcast. We are your funky, bearded, nerdy hosts, and we are back to bring you some glorious DC content in the form of the wonderful, the epically well done, old school show, Smallville. Gentlemen, how are you doing tonight?
I have no complaints whatsoever.
Doing well.
Wonderful. And my mic's still good?
Yep.
Okay. So today, obviously, as you know from the intro song, if any of you are familiar with the show, Smallville is basically the CW's old school original boot up of what they wanted the Arrowverse is what it was, the new CW, but it was around Superman versus being individual shows. This whole universe where you had awesome people, Tom Welling's Superman, you had Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor, who I will still argue to this day is the best live action Lex Luthor. Okay, you can shake your head all day long, sir. It does not take it away. But it's okay. We will get into a War of Nerds later about that. And then you had other people as part of the Justice League, like Justin Hartley's Green Arrow, Alan Richardson's Aquaman, and the gentleman who played Cyborg, which I actually liked him a lot. The guy who played Cyborg in Smallville. I enjoyed the guy in the movie, too. I actually thought he was fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have loved to have seen that OG cast from Smallville in the movies if they didn't use the people from the TV shows today.
Yeah. That always baffled
when
me.
you go back and look,
obviously I know why.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, obviously I know why they didn't do it, money-wise and all that type of stuff, but it just baffles me that they never allowed them to do that, you know?
Yeah, it's... Yep. Smallville came out back in the early 2000s, and it was like, before that, we had stuff like the 80s animated X-Men, Marvel, obviously. You had the 90s Flash live-action TV show, which was a good one. I enjoyed that. You had I think it came out in the 80s or the 90s. My gut's telling me the 90s, but Lois and Clark with Dean Cain. That was a really good one. And you had other animated shows like The Flash and Batman and et cetera, in the old Batman movies with Michael Keaton, George Clooney, Arnold Schwarzenegger, et cetera. But Smallville was like our first real introduction to a massive scope TV show with these characters in it centered around. Now, this is another unpopular opinion, but I think Tom Welling is one of the best live-action Supermans. And maybe it's because, Clark Kent, actually. He was good as Superman too, but the role of Clark Kent, I feel like he really had down to a T. And perhaps it's because he had the most runtime to play that character. So we were allowed to get invested in him and really understand him. And he felt like, we talked about this on another episode, how Superman feels he sucks because he's invincible. But Tom Welling's Clark Kent, Superman, you felt like you could relate to him because he felt more like Bart Allen showed up. Bart Allen was faster than him. Green Arrow showed up. He knew more about technology than him. I mean, et cetera, the list goes on. But I'm curious what you guys think.
Well, I think I was going to say, in Smallville, he kind of is Clark Kent. You don't really get Superman, and that whole battling who he is kind of thing is heavy with teenage angst throughout the series. So I think that, too, is he's still Clark Kent, or trying to be Clark Kent through a majority of the TV series. So I think that lends into him really bringing that character to life. But I remember it was one of the first shows maybe not one of the first shows, but my family and I would binge watch TV shows. And this is one of the ones I remember sitting on a school night, binge watching till 1 o'clock in the morning, and then calling me out of school the next day so we could finish the season because we were so hooked on it. And it was kind of like how Game of Thrones is now, where it was like, oh, did you see the newest Smallville, and everybody that you knew had watched it, and you talked about the episode. At least for me, it was. Um, but it also was the first time you saw, which again, why it baffles me, the building of a world within a TV show, and then they never went anywhere with it. They could have carried those people into a sequel series where now they're the adults and they're the superheroes, or into movies, but it built on a world, and you had people come in who, granted, you never really got to see Batman, although he was hinted at in a couple of episodes, but it was Superman's show. You got to see his Justice League before they were a team, and it was just super cool meeting all these characters and seeing where they started.
Absolutely.
100%.
And I think, go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah. No, you're fine, brother. Go ahead.
I was just going to touch on, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who is a Superman fan about our episode that people, when they're watching this, will have seen, the Superman Sucks episode. But I was telling him about this way ahead of us recording even this, and he's a Superman fan, and he brought up a lot of good points that we probably didn't consider during that episode. However, our biggest gripe was he was unrelatable as a character for us, with having so many strengths and very few weaknesses, and even his weaknesses were he could find a way around it. Like, he always had a workaround. The complete difference with Smallville was they made Clark Kent so relatable. They made him a completely different person than the image most people have of Superman. If you didn't say Clark Kent would become Superman, I would never make the connection through Smallville. Like, he just would have been a person with super abilities who had weaknesses, but his entire life was spelled out for us with all these relatable events that he had to go through while hiding who he was and trying to figure out who he wants to become. And I think that was the major difference of why we hate on Superman, yet all three of us seem to really like Smallville's version of Clark Kent. And I think Nathan put it very well, that it's about Clark Kent and not so much Superman. And I think that's probably going to be the biggest takeaway from this by the time we get to the end of it.
I think you nailed the nail on the head right there. And I think another thing about, well, just Smallville in general is like you said, all of the buildup, all of these kind of smaller or lesser known characters, and all of the really interesting episodes that they did. I mean, we had an episode with, you guys remember the episode? It's in season 7 where Clark, by this time, Lana knows his secret, and she's come back from China after divorcing Lex. And Clark's cousin, Kara Zor-El, she comes, and when the dam broke, she was released. And was looking for her crystal, but Clark found it. And within that crystal had the DNA of Clark's mother, Laura. And then you also saw Zor-El show up, and we got introduced to blue kryptonite. Mm-hmm. And when it was put on his finger through that ring, he lost his powers completely. Not like crippled, not weak, not changing his inhibition, completely just nullified his powers. And I found that to be really interesting, because all of the episodes where Clark was just regular Clark Kent, he was like sweating, or the first time we saw him use super breath was a really interesting way to do it. He got sick because of overexerting himself. And then all of a sudden, he's learning how to use his super breath ability from sneezing a barn door 6 miles across Lowell County. And then you've got Lois finding that, and she's like, what happened? Your barn door's gone. And so
I love
really
the bringing up of being like a teenager, and I think it's when he's going through puberty and he sees a hot teacher and he has laser vision for the first time or something, and it was the different teenage angsty stuff that brought out some of his powers, and that was unique and different for me, because it's like, Superman didn't always have X-ray vision, he didn't always have laser eyes. Interesting, he's starting to learn this stuff, which was really cool for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the super breath is definitely one of those situations.
But yeah, it's cool to see them gain control over something they didn't understand in that regard. And again, they brought it back to what you're talking about with being a teenager and having to learn your body goes through changes, and they're relating it to a superhero going through those changes and learning all this stuff that he should be capable of, but just hasn't done yet. So it was a very unique story for them to tell, and again, made him vastly more relatable than grown-up adult Superman for me personally.
Oh yeah,
And
and
I also,
just like,
yeah, go ahead.
well, what was that, Nathan?
Oh, I was just saying, go ahead, brother. You're good.
Oh, uh, uh, I think if I'm not mistaken, and I could be wrong, I think it got a little bit of flack when it first came out because it wasn't accurate to the comic book, and people were griping about a few different things. But I think that was one of the best decisions they could have made, was to deviate from the comics and tell a story they wanted to with Superman, because
Mhm.
like the idea of the kryptonite coming to his town and just ending up everywhere and affecting everybody, because learning in those first few seasons how each individual person was affected by that meteor strike was again a great way to make the characters relatable, especially Lex Luthor, because he was one of my favorite characters for several seasons, and it killed me to know what he would eventually become because it's Lex Luthor. And I was rooting for them to be friends and hoping, even though again I knew what the outcome would be, hoping that they could reconcile some way. But building that history between Lex and Superman really made me love the Lex Luthor in that show.
Absolutely.
100%. 100%. And I also think another thing that's important to mention is, like you were talking about with Lex, like he was probably my favorite character in the entire show, and I've always been a big Lex Luthor fan. I'm always a fan of the human villains, the ones who don't necessarily have greater than thou art God powers, you know, Kingpin, Lex Luthor, Joker, et cetera, et cetera. But Michael Rosenbaum's interpretation and the way that he just grasped the role of Lex Luthor, it was in his facial expressions, the way that he spoke. He's just like so calm and collected about it. He's like, I don't know, Clark. Why don't you tell me? What were you doing in Luthor Corp? Huh? I thought we were friends. Did you really think I'd leave you here to die, Clark? And like just the way that he would smile, just like, I'm sorry, doctor. The last time I checked, his Luthor Corps was paying your bills. And you're like, dude, you just nail it so well every single time. You don't know what he's going to do or what he's capable of doing because his emotions are just so, they really delve deep into the whole Luther mindset from not just Lionel, but leading down to Lex. And then obviously Grant Gabriel comes in. His actual name's Julian Luther, but he is another one of my favorite characters, kind of playing that double split agent type. You know, at the Daily Planet, he's Grant Gabriel, but to Lex, he's Julian Luther. But he's like, you only use that name inside this mansion, and you're like, so it makes you wonder, like, what would have happened if Clark would have told Lex his secret from the beginning? Would it have changed Lex's path? I mean, Lionel was kind of the villain at that point in time, at least the
Mhm.
way they were kind of portraying it. Lionel was the dirty, nasty, rich Luther who was basically, Lex hated him at that point in time, and they didn't see eye to eye on anything. Lionel was the one who was interested in the caves. Lionel was the one interested in this and that. It wasn't until the point that Lionel became Jor-El's vessel that he started really changing. And then Lionel kind of became our likable character, kind of flipped his role, and Lex became that one descending, like his divorce with Lana, I feel like was the tripping point for him descending towards madness. It was at that point. And then season 7 leading to the end, obviously Zod comes in like the last season, the last couple seasons, but the last season when Sam Witwer's in there,
Mhm.
like, dude, he's so good in that last season. I love Sam Witwer. But that's another thing that I want to say, and then my tangent's over. One thing I appreciated about Smallville. Oh, and you can cut this next part out. Is my mic still good? You guys are still hearing me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
The one thing I really appreciated about Smallville um, was how when later on, when the CW came out with Arrow, Flash, Supergirl Legends, if you've seen Smallville or any of the old school shows, you started recognizing characters playing different roles who were in Smallville. Kara's mother was played by the chick who played Lois Lane.
Mhm.
Dean Cain, who played that corrupt, immortal scientist, Knox in Smallville, played Kara's adopted father in Smallville. Kara's adopted mother in Smallville was the one who played Clark's birth mother, Laura, in Smallville. His cousin, Kara, was the one who played Brainiac 5
Mhm.
in Supergirl. And you see all these little different things that like intertwine and spin in. You didn't see Justin Hartley or anything like that, which I would have loved to have seen him in there. I feel like he's an underrated actor. But there's so many different things. And at the Crisis on Infinite Earths point in the CW universe, the version of Lex, he was actually the actor from How I Met Your Mother, or no, Two and a Half Men. Sorry, he was the opposite of Charlie Sheen,
Oh,
and
yep.
he played phenomenal Lex Luthor in Supergirl. During Crisis on Infinite Earths, he actually goes to another planet because he's going and trying to murder all the other Supermen. He ends up on Smallville in Kansas from Tom Welling's universe, and they play the "Somebody Save Me." Shows up, Tom Welling comes out, big, bulky, older Tom Welling, like Kane version from the Lucifer show, and Lex is just like, "It is you, Kal-El," and he's just like, "I'm sorry, who are you?" He's like, "I'm Lex Luthor." He's like, "Lex is the president of the United States." Like, okay, whatever. He tries to sock Tom Welling's Clark. Clark just grabs his hand, knocks him out, and he tries using kryptonite. That doesn't work. He's just like, "I gave up my powers for life with Lois and the kids." And he's like, "Even without my powers, I can still take you." It was like the perfect moment. Tom Welling's little smirk, and then Lex is like, "Whatever, you're all doomed to fail." Blah blah blah, and he takes off. Anyways, rant over. But yeah.
So I think that really highlights how much we like, and it's our Superman Sucks episode was meant to be like hit you in the face with what we think, but the fact that even without his powers, Superman still beats Lex Luthor should be something we put in the negative category. But because Tom Wellington's uh, Clark Kent and Superman is so good, I can look past that because it was so amazing to see him in that role again and experience him being like, yeah, I gave up my powers because it fits that Clark Kent so well.
Mhm.
But to answer your question about Lex Luthor, I I think it still would have ended up the same. I think it would have been worse though. And that's kind of what I was hoping for was that he befriends Superman and knows all his truths and ends up there's something that breaks. He wants to go one direction and Clark wants to go another and they just can't see eye to eye because of ideology, whatever, decisions. Sorry. And just ends up breaking off into different directions and that's where the split occurs. And I think that would have been maybe not more impactful or emotional because they did an amazing job of the show, but it would have been a different kind of emotional. So I don't think their paths would have differentiated too much, but I do think it would have changed for the first couple of seasons.
There's a
That's interesting.
yeah. Go ahead, Nathan.
No, you're fine.
Well, I want to go a little different than that. Like along the same lines, had they become friends, Lex Luthor learns all his secrets and then still becomes the villain Lex Luthor. In that world, would he use what he knows against Clark, or would it always be that guillotine hanging over Clark Kent slash Superman's head that he's not using that information, but still challenging him as the supervillain, but never pulling that string of I know who you really are and I could expose you at any minute, but I won't. I'm gonna beat you in my own way at my own game. Like I just something about that would be a very incredible storyline, I think.
Here's the thing that kind of tears me in half with that one is ever since the beginning when Smallville first started, and actually, like Alfred said, there's a lot of things that are very different from the comics in Smallville. They took their own approach to it, their own creative liberty, and I actually really appreciated the whole meteor shower, and that's how metahumans were created, et cetera, et cetera. and that's Clark discovering the whole kryptonite thing. But with Lex was always interested in Clark and the Kent, like from the very beginning, just because of the fact he saved Lex. And Lex, he's a very, because of his childhood and how traumatic he was, the experiences with his own family, he is a very non-trusting individual, but a very grateful individual when something is bestowed onto him, especially something he doesn't understand, because his brain was hardwired by his father to understand, know everything, gain information and knowledge from anywhere that you possibly can to know more than everyone else. And so what makes me question it is that in the Crisis on Infinite Earths, though this was the CW's crossover and its different creative liberties, Lex was the president on that planet at that point in time. So clearly, even after all the events on Smallville, Lex was still able to turn somewhat of a new leaf because Clark gave up his abilities. And if Lex was evil still at that point in time, Clark wouldn't have given up his abilities no matter what. Lois wouldn't have allowed him to do it because he was the only one there. However, Kara could still take care of things on that planet. But it really makes me wonder, because I've always had suspicions about if Lex would turn a new leaf in Smallville. By the time that the show ended, I've been rewatching it again, and I haven't gotten to the last few seasons yet, but I don't remember if he actually turns a new leaf by the end of the season. The way I remember it is he was in prison, and that was how the show ended, was with him in prison. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not.
I think you're right.
It's been a while, but I think he was in prison. You know what? You guys ask each other a question or pick up a thought, and I'm going to look it up.
Well, I'll go on a side tangent because you mentioned Lucifer earlier, and I just rewatched. I'm like almost done with it, and I did not recognize him as the same actor until my wife pointed him out and was like, he looks really familiar. And we were probably like, he's been in 12 episodes before we finally looked it up, but she's like, it looks like him. And I'm like, there's no way. There's no way this is the same guy. And sure enough, I look it up and I'm like, wow, consider me humbled because that's absolutely him in a beefcake of a like growing up. But
he's such a great actor.
he is,
He
absolutely.
killed that role too.
Yes, he did.
He was an amazing, probably the best Kane I've ever seen presented in media.
Yep.
Most of the time it's done, and I'm like, nah. Okay, let's see. We're gonna go on a side tangent. Who?
I don't know, bro. The dude in Smallville was really, really good as Kane, or not Smallville, Supernatural. He was really, really good. So I don't know if I can give Tom Welling the crown for Kane. He was up there, number 2 in my book. But the dude in Supernatural was just, he had that edge to where you're just like, yeah, he betrayed Jesus, he betrayed God, he betrayed all the angels, and he literally got the mark of death for murdering his brother. And now he's just a straight, he's cursed for the rest of his life. And that mark he gave to Dean. But that guy, for me, was the best Kane, at least for me. But I need to go back and watch Supernatural again because it's been a minute and I've only watched the show 3 times through. So I always pick stuff up the more I watch it. And when I watched Lucifer,
I do want to touch on Ryan. I do want to touch on Ryan's too. I think that's a really good question too. To remind the listeners, if he did befriend him, and then and then they split up, would he use that? And I don't think he would, for a couple of reasons. One, when Superman's at his peak, I don't think it would affect him in a negative way unless he were to sell that information to a super villain.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Lex would do that. I think he likes, similar to what Nathan was saying, likes the idea of having that information. And especially the Smallville version of him would have been like, he bestowed this on me. I won't betray his trust, but I'll beat him at his own game, knowing this. And then I think that could be fun if he descends even further into villainhood and then eventually gives that information out to somebody to break it even further. But I think he would enjoy having that threat, but never pull the trigger.
And I agree with you. I don't think it's something he would ever use, and I don't think he would even like tease Clark Kent with it. It would be in Clark Kent's own head, knowing like you saved my life. I will keep your secret, but we are still villain and hero of our own stories. I will not use your secret against you because you saved my life, but I always will know it. And I think it's going to be in Clark Kent's own head that at any point that switch could flip, but it never will. I don't think he would ever do it because I think he wants to win at his own game. He wants to not have to use his cheat card to win. So I agree with you there. But it was just like as you guys were talking about that, if they went on a different path, but you're talking Smallville, Lex Luthor, Clark Kent relationship, I definitely think that would be a factor if they went evil villain hero, but were more friends where they had learned the secret. I think it would have to go down that path. But
especially with the Smallville Clark Kent, because he had moments like that in the series where his own mind would play with his decisions, and I think most of the time it did have to do with Lex, but other people as well. Like he couldn't get over the idea, no, this person's going to do this, and they didn't, and he ended up causing a lot of the issues because he thought that way.
Yep.
So I definitely think that would happen that way.
Let's see if I can. Here we go. That was the guy. If it'll let me
It's
do
not
it here.
shown.
We can put a picture on.
That's the guy who played Kane.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And he was really, really good. So I would challenge, like Tom Welling was good too. Don't get me wrong. That's why I'm saying that's like, oh man, that's really when you have to think hard to make that determination. That's when you know. But really, back to my last thing, really quick.
Sure.
So at the end of Smallville, Lex is meeting with his sister, with Tess, and Bailey stabs her, but she poisons him with a specialized neurotoxin that removes all of his memories, and then it flashed forward 7 years in the future, and Lex is president. So that was how the show ended. So Lex didn't have his memories of all the evil stuff he did, didn't know who Clark was. So it kind of leaves you off like wondering, like, okay, with no memories, is he gonna ever revert back to his Luthor ways? He's president of the United States now.
So
we did the crossover with Tom Welling there and everything was fine. Makes you wonder, like, all right, well, maybe it is okay.
Nathan, I'm going to use one of your favorite questions we do when we interview somebody. If Lex and Clark are on an island and they've lost their memories, but Clark does still have his powers, do they become friends even when they get their memories back, or does it happen the way it happens in the show?
That's a good question. I think they probably become friends. Truth be told, I don't think Clark has that lurking feeling in the back of his subconscious, keeping him from worrying about keeping secrets from anybody. So he's going to tell, like, Lex, they're stranded on an island. He's going to be like, look, I realize I just discovered I have these powers. Maybe he can help us get off of this island. So I feel like he would tell them, Lex would be like, this is fantastic. This is phenomenal. Like, but then when they get back, because they're going to figure out a way how to get off the island, obviously. And when they get back, Lex is going to be like, look, would you be willing to allow me to do some tests? And then as the memories slowly trickle back, Clark's going to be like, you're not capable of friendship, Lex. I can't believe I ever told you this when our memories were gone, Clark. You trusted me then. Why don't you trust me now? Like, that would be that would be a perfect just episode of like a what if episode if that happened to those two characters.
Right?
I feel like it would roll in a similar way to that. With those two specific
I was thinking
villains.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have an idea on it, Ryan?
I think it would end up the same. I think ultimately, no matter who you have, the story that it is, Lex Luthor is going to go down a certain path. And I think he's trying not to become his father, and ultimately he does. And I think the other half of that coin is Superman's trying to live up to what he has in ability for humanity that lacks in that ability. So I think those two stories are always going to continue no matter what the external factors are. It may happen differently, but the ultimate end game, I think, would be the same regardless. For me personally, with those two in mind.
Thinking too. as once the memories start coming back, I think Lex's insecurities, where you told me when you didn't know who I was, so you would tell a complete stranger, but when you know who I am, you wouldn't tell me. I think that would come back up, and it would only further Lex's self uh, frustration with Clark. And I think Clark would actually try. He'd be like, "No, see, I didn't have the worry of who I am that affects me telling you." So yeah, I think in the end it would end up the same way. They'd go on two different paths, but it's fun. I love that question.
Yeah.
And it was truly the entangled journey of Clark and Lex's individual stories that would always crossing paths, like earlier in the seasons with the caves, the Native American caves, where all the old Kryptonian signs were there, and Clark was always trying to sneak down there. But of course, there would always be either Lionel or Lex down there to be like, and you know, Lex in his very like mysterious voice, "What are you doing here, Clark? This is a restricted area." You know, like that. Or Lionel would be just like, "Oh, Clark," you know, and I love John Glover, okay? Like honestly, his portrayal of Lionel Luthor was phenomenal. And I think that was one of the creative liberties the show took, because I don't really remember Lionel Luthor being a huge character in the comics. I could be mistaken, but I don't remember. That's the thing. I didn't remember until Smallville. That's when I really fell in love with the character.
Yeah.
So whether he was created in purposes for the actual show itself or it's something that dates to the comics, I couldn't tell you. But I loved it in the show. And I know he eventually dies later in the later seasons. He's thrown from the top of Luthor Corp and from the building. He's either shot or he's stabbed by, I think it's Lex. I'm going to look it up just to double check. But my question for you guys is, while I'm looking that up, what is your favorite season of Smallville and why?
I knew this was coming. Do you have one,
I
Alfred?
don't know the season. I'm sure Nathan will be able to tell me. But it's when Oliver Queen and Superman and the duo of them kind of being the main focus for a couple of seasons. It's when they first kind of really catch their stride. That's my favorite season. It's both Green Arrow and Superman and their kind of struggle of how they should do things. But I loved that version of Oliver Queen before we got Arrow. But that was one of my favorite versions of him.
Okay, I was close. It wasn't Lex, but in the Smallville series finale, Lionel Luthor is shot by Tess after he tries to give her heart to a clone of Lex.
So she does everything.
Yeah. And then Lionel then surrenders his soul to Darkseid, who gives Lionel's heart to the clone, effectively resurrecting Lex. Darkseid then possesses Lionel's corpse to attack Clark, but Clark destroys Lionel's body, ending Darkseid's threat. So I actually forgot Darkseid came into Smallville.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I cannot wait to get to these later seasons again. I only remembered Zod, so
I'll
I'm
have
like
to rewatch
already
it.
excited again.
Brainiac. Masters is one of my favorite actors when he was on Buffy and everything. So when he came in as Brainiac, I was like, this is awesome.
That's literally what I was gonna say. Season 5 was my favorite when Brainiac entered and the Fortress of Solitude and Clark training. Like that was probably the height for me.
That was when that one dude got released who was working with Brainiac, and he was trying to release Zod, and then got Zod into Lex's body, and then Clark and him had that tussle before it was all fixed again. But that was really dope. I really liked Brainiac coming in. So the fact that they used Laura Vandervoort, who played Kara in Smallville, to play Brainiac and Supergirl, I really appreciated that. They actually had two versions of the Brainiac type in Supergirl. They had Brainiac that you can Brainiac 5, and then you actually had another Brainiac from the same planet who knew everything about their race and about the Brainiac race. So that was pretty interesting. And now this really makes me even more, huh?
I was gonna say I like too the comic book style, and I look back at them as filler episodes, but especially during the high school years, like the Bumblebee girl that was turned by kryptonite and whatnot, and you had the comic book like villains in high school, and it was Scooby Doo esque where the gang had to find out who the villain was and beat them. And I even liked like that style of storytelling for this series. And even though, again, like I said, it didn't partake in the overall story of that season. I liked those episodes. It really reminded you that you're watching a comic book hero, and it was cool enough that it didn't make you like, oh my goodness, this is so silly or whatnot. I enjoyed those episodes, especially in the earlier seasons.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was, and it makes me even more frustrated with the whole Zack Snyder Justice League bullcrap because you have that opportunity to really, really use Darkseid as an awesome villain, but no, instead, you know who we're going to use? Steppenwolf, someone that nobody literally cares about. Or maybe if people did care about him, they sure don't now. I can
No.
promise you that because the way they did it in the movie was just like, I'm a Steppenwolf against Darkseid. Like, no, please don't. Just go away. Like the entire like extended cut where they actually showed Darkseid, I was like, why not just like completely redo the movie and get rid of Steppenwolf or use Steppenwolf in the very beginning and release Darkseid? And now
Mhm.
you have a threat that would actually require waking up Superman, using Aquaman, even though he's worthless besides talking to fish, and Cyborg. And I'm sorry, I love doing the Aquaman show. I could care less about Aquaman. Jason Momoa's version's pretty cool. But I only watched the first Aquaman movie. Hashtag Johnny Depp is my hero. And I can't wait for the next Pirates. Anyways, that's another subject. But so do you guys remember in Smallville when you remember the Legion that came in and they took over the clock tower? So this was when Chloe she got the helmet from the one dude,
Mhm.
and she was able
Yep.
to like use his powers temporarily. Because Chloe's able to
Wasn't
heal
it like
people.
Fate or
That's
something
her.
like that?
Yeah, Fate.
The
That's
name.
exactly what it was. Yep. And I've only seen Doctor Fate once before, and but I actually saw it first in Smallville, and then it happened again in Legends of Tomorrow when the Legends went back in time. They saw the Legion, and they met Doctor Fate. They met the dude who played in Suits, who played Michael. He played another superhero, part of the Legion. But the whole Doctor Fate, and they brought in some other superheroes there to the clock tower. And that was by that point in time, Justin Hartley's Green Arrow, Aquaman, all of them. Well, Hartley's Green Arrow was a major character and a main role by that point in time. He stayed in the seasons from that point on. Like he came in season 6, he stayed around for a little bit. He was in a few episodes, and then he left. He was with the Justice League, and they didn't show up again. And then I know he comes back because he's in like a total of like 70 episodes of the show. So the last like 3 seasons, he's like a major role. I think 8, 9, and 10. Um, because I really, if they wouldn't have brought Stephen Amell in as Green Arrow, Justin Hartley would have been my guy. He would have been the one I would have wanted to see in like every portrayal of Green Arrow. But then they brought Stephen Amell in, and I'm just like, well, Justin, you did a great job, and I still hold you dear in my heart. But sorry, Stephen Amell is the Green Arrow. Um, you know, so
I'm with you.
yeah, it was. And then Chloe and Oliver actually ended up getting married. Um, by the end of the show, they ended up getting married. I don't really know. I don't know if I really liked that direction. Here's the thing. I wasn't really a huge fan of Chloe's character in general. I found her overly whiny at the very beginning, um, and very, very. I don't know what the word would be, but like you literally want to be somewhere else where she's not. And every time she would smile, I would grit my teeth because I thought she was like an attack, like alien in a robot's body. Like her eyes get all like it, the clown from It, like all like. I'm like, bro, you're very creepy. I should be scared of your powers.
Yeah, I think in the earlier seasons, like I couldn't stand Lana because she was just wishy-washy and she led Clark on and all that type of stuff. But I
Oh yeah.
remember at one point I switched and I liked Lana way more than I liked Chloe, I
Yep.
think, or I just never liked Chloe. I just remember that she was annoying, but I can't remember when I had that thought. And she's a horrible person, so there's that too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm.
I was watching a video about like shows that started out in the high school years, went to the college years, and how they usually fall off in that. What is your perspective on Smallville? Did they pull it off with that transition from them leaving high school, going to adulthood, or is that where the show started to teeter for you guys?
No, I actually enjoyed it when they were out of high school. Thank God I didn't have to deal with the drama anymore. Um, it was a breath of fresh air. I'm like, I don't want to see every single one of his high school years. Please, for the love of all that's holy, start the show when he's in like his junior year, like Spider-Man. For like, don't make us suffer through high school all over again with Lana and Chloe and Pete. I miss Pete. Pete was awesome. Then Pete left. Bob, Pete, and Repeat were on a boat. Bob and Pete fell off. Who was left?
Not falling for that.
No, that's um, but I loved Pete, and he actually comes back again later. So after he leaves, he's gone for a long while.
Mhm.
You actually like forget about him, kind of sadly, because they don't even mention him. Like Clark mentions a couple times, like Pete had to leave because of me, and then it's just like we're just gonna forget that Pete ever existed, and we're gonna focus on really annoying characters and two-faced whiny girls like Lana and Chloe. And so here's the thing: the whole thing with Lana marrying Lex, I feel like they tried. I actually liked Lana more after she became kind of almost insidious. She had this darker side to her where you don't know what to expect from her. It shows what happens to somebody who's forced to play games by a Luthor
Mhm.
and is forced to be around the Luthors. Chloe, I feel like, comes into her own character closer to the Doctor Fate episodes. So those are, I believe, season 8. That's when Green Arrow comes back and their love interest starts up. And around the same time that Lois and Clark finally start actually like becoming a couple. When Martha Kent left the show, I was really sad because she was one of my favorite characters. I wholeheartedly think Annette O'Toole was the best Martha Kent we've ever gotten. Some people might argue that the version who played Martha in the new DC movies is really good too, and she is. Um, but Annette O'Toole just did a phenomenal job, and John Schneider did a really great job playing John Kent. Um, or I think that was
The
his name.
episode where he has the heart attack and dies still kills me. Like
Oh yeah,
that's
it was
such
rough,
a
man.
oh man, that's a hard episode. But he comes back later on as kind of like a dream to listen,
Hmm.
bud. You're still like that fatherly meant like oh that I love that relationship between the two.
What's tough about it is you spent more time with Jonathan Kent in Smallville than you do in any other interpretation of
Mhm.
Superman's story, because all of the other ones are movies, and in the animated show, still Jonathan Kent was already dead, and it was just old Martha Kent, his mama, and the farm. You really got to understand Jonathan Kent as a character and a person, and you felt to really appreciate him and understand why Clark became so in tune with humanity
Mhm.
because of who his parents were. And so getting to spend 5, 6 seasons with Jonathan Kent and then losing him, one, you felt for Clark. So with Superman in the movies, you didn't really feel when Jonathan Kent died. You're just like, oh, just like the comics, we expected this to happen. But in Smallville, you're like, are they going to do it to where he doesn't die? You like were really maybe convinced for a while, like maybe somehow he's going to stick around. And then they're just like, Clark begs Jor-El. He's like, I can't lose Lana. I just told her my secret. I just got her back. I can't lose her. He's just like, my son, there are always consequences, blah, blah, blah. He's like, just do it. And so it goes back, and then Lana's saved, and Jonathan Kent dies that night in the barn.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like,
yep,
dang. Like, you knew it was coming at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as soon as he started, like, grabbing his heart and stuff, you're like, when the balance of life and death, it's a positive equal exchange, just like FMA Brotherhood. For one thing to go, another thing must give. So you just knew it was going to happen at that point, and then Clark was just broken at that point in time. And
decisions.
I know this is a Marvel line, but with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that really stands true to even real life. Like, with great power comes great responsibility. The decisions we have to make on an everyday basis, there's consequences to every choice that you make, no matter what you're doing. So as a superhero, somebody with powers that are more than normal mortal men, you are trying to change the fate of the natural balance of life. And when you do that, there are always consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Just in writing in general, with stories and characters. So when Jonathan Kent went, it was rough. And so I really came to really love Martha even more. And then she left to go to Washington, D.C. to become a senator. And she wasn't around for like all of season 7. But I liked it when she came back. She was working for Lionel Luthor at that point in time. I believe, because she lost her position as a senator, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. But for me, to answer Ryan's question, I do think it stumbled a little bit out of high school to kind of find its footing, what they're going to do. But if I remember correctly, they kind of went back to that old style of, there's this comic book villain kind of guy that you got to stop, and they kind of rehashed that style. And it took them a couple of episodes and maybe even a season, but once they kind of got into what they're going to do as the Blur and what he's going to do as a superhero, I thought it really revamped the series and continued strong. So I think whatever they did in that decision-making process when they were writing those episodes afterwards, they really did a good job of like, this is where we want to go. We're going to stick to what got us here, but get rid of that younger mentality and start going with the older mindset.
That absolutely makes sense.
I'm looking this up here to see. So yeah, it's when she comes back, like season 8, and she's got those gray streaks in her hair, and she's no longer working in the Senate anymore, and she goes and works for Lionel Luthor. I remember there was a point in time where she worked for Lionel or Lex or just Luthor Corp in general. Because at that point in time, Clark was spending so much time in Metropolis with the Daily Planet, Lois, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that I've mentioned before, you guys both know, and any of the listeners know, that ticked me off the most about Smallville is that Clark, oh, I don't know how to fly. Oh, gee whiz, she can fly. How can Kara fly the minute she gets out of her pod magically without understanding anything about Earth's atmosphere? But then they're saying, oh, because she's been to the planet before. So she was there for like 15 minutes. So I don't understand how not only does Clark have his cousin, but he also has John Jones, the Martian Manhunter, which is, by the way, like one of my favorite DC characters ever across the board. I love the Martian Manhunter. And I actually like the guy in Supergirl, the show Supergirl, who plays him better than the guy in Smallville. But they're both pretty good. That really bothered me that, like, he only flew when he was, like, possessed by his true Kryptonian nature, or he didn't have control of his mind, or something else like that. Otherwise, I don't remember him flying until the last season of Smallville. And it was around that time.
I think
like
I heard something. Sorry, I think I heard something where it was like it was cheaper because that was the whole problem. Like, they didn't want to spend the money on the budget to make him fly. But the problem is, like you're saying, in the story itself, they didn't build a good enough reason why he couldn't, and that's always felt grimy for me as well.
it just doesn't make sense to me, because even in the Supergirl show, Kara knew how to fly, like when she was a little girl. Obviously, like I said, creative liberties are different and such. But there was, like you said, there's no good reason for him not to be able to fly, especially with having people like Jean and Kara around him who could literally teach him how to do it if he didn't miraculous. Because Kara, like Supergirl, is stronger and faster than Superman in the comics and in live action. Kryptonian women mature quicker than Kryptonian men, so it makes sense. But you're going to tell me that Smallville's own Clark Kent, Superman, can't fly until the very, very last season, and then he doesn't even get his costume until the last episode? I mean, that's rubbish. Rubbish. Okay? Rubbish! But I did like seeing different characters like Lois having different relationships with different people like Grant Gabriel, Oliver Queen, little flings that happen that aren't Clark, because you're just like, oh, so this is like what happened with them before they met each other. You saw Lois, the daughter of General Lane, the general's daughter. I like that they made Lois capable of being able to beat the crap out of people in Smallville. It makes sense. Her dad's a 4-star general in the army. You would think she'd be taught how to do that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like any military brat probably is. In the movies, she's just like this brassy, sassy reporter who's just like, oh yeah, she's got an attitude and wit and everything else, and she's, sure, she's sharp, but you don't see her just like karate chopping, like, oh yeah, like that was awesome. I'm just saying. Got some like Bruce Chen, like Taekwondo, Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee. So I like that about Lois. I kind of wish though that Clark would have told Lois about his secret sooner. That was one thing that I would have liked to have seen. I feel like once we moved past Smallville, Kansas, we're all out of high school. First of all, we're all out of high school, so why are we still in Smallville so much? I get the show's called Smallville, but that's like Clark's nickname. So can we not just move it to Metropolis, period, and just leave it there, please?
Yeah, I think part of that was probably just because they were so used, like that's where the kryptonite had fallen, that's where Lex was located to some degree. I see what you're saying, but it didn't bother me too much. But I could see, and I do think, and this is how little I know about Superman. Does Lois know about Clark in the comics or later on, or is she never? Does she ever find out who Clark actually is?
Yeah, like it eventually gets
Okay.
revealed to her specifically, but way
So that's
later,
kind of
I
where
think.
I took that.
Yeah.
I didn't think she should know who Clark was for during the entirety of Smallville, because it was like the build up. And even when you get like the the TV show, the cartoon, she doesn't know who Superman or Clark Kent is. She just thinks they are two different people. So I didn't necessarily mind that she didn't know, but it was also like, you're in a relationship with him. Come on, tell her, tell her, tell her. You need to tell her. But I knew like it
Yeah.
wasn't accurate if he did.
Like, how many times? Like, he told Lana, he told Chloe. Why can't he just tell Lana, or Lois, the one that he really truly loves? Like,
Mhm.
but he eventually did. They found out and everything else. Things in the comics and like the movies, Lois was always a very intrepid reporter. She would always figure things out for herself, knack for curiosity and knack for figuring out the unknown. Similar to Lex, but on a less maniacal scheming level. And so her figuring out who Clark is on her own actually would be something that's kind of cool, because you would think she could connect the dots like that. That's why I love the old college humor videos where it's just like, wait, I'm Clark Kent? Newsflash, it takes more than glasses and comb back hair to fool me. Oh, look, I'm not Commissioner Gordon. I'm somebody else. Who are you? Where's the commissioner? Oh, you're back. Superman, you saw him. He was another man. Like, seriously, it's the dumbest. Like, anyways, but my question.
I have something funny for that. really quick.
Yeah, good.
I saw someone post on TikTok. They were like, Zoe Deschanel. She's the actress from New Girl, and in New Girl, she has bangs and glasses. And they put a side by side of what she looks like in real life and what she looks like on the show. And they were like, okay, now I kind of understand how Clark Kent can go incognito with glasses, and I can't tell who this is with bangs and glasses. I was like, okay, all right, that adds some credibility to it.
I get it. It was back in the whole age of like punny humor, just like Star Wars and things like that, where it's just like he gels his hair back, he puts a pair of glasses on, and all of a sudden he's Clark Kent. He's no longer Superman. And it was funny because it was back in, the 70s and stuff, and people expected nothing less than like it's obviously in your face, it's Superman, but everybody else is just like, he's all goofy, like, oh, gee whiz, sorry, I didn't see you there. That's one thing that I did appreciate about Henry Cavill's version of Superman, is that he played that whole kind of like, oh, gee, sorry, Miss Lane, like the whole kind of thing like that. Or one of my favorites is Tyler's something. Plays Superman in the CW universe, and he really nails the goofy, just like, oh, gee whiz, and like tilt the glasses up, and he's just like, so sorry, I'm such a klutz, and you're just like, dude, you can literally bend aircrafts in half. Like, it's perfect because he nails the role of like glasses on, like all of a sudden pretending like he's just this nerdy, like not to the level of Barry Allen nerd, but like, you know what I mean. So
Yep.
I appreciated stuff like that.
I do
I
think
have a
too,
question.
because like if you watch older, sorry, I keep interrupting you, Nathan. But like when you think comic books, like the audience are kids, so that you want the kid to know who the superhero is, even if they're incognito. So yes, it's this. You can see the drawing is the same. He just has glasses on. It reminds me of like old school Power Rangers, where when they're not the Power Rangers, they're still wearing the color shirt that they are, so you know which Power Ranger is which.
Daddy, I
But
don't know which
please,
Power Ranger it is. He's wearing a yellow shirt, son. That's the yellow Power Ranger. Oh, wow. And like, it's like, oh,
precisely.
Daddy, look, that's Superman. Like, well done, son. Your powers of perception are beyond this mortal world. So my question for you guys is, in Smallville, you have one character that's also in Supergirl, Jimmy Olsen, the intrepid photographer and very curious George. Do you prefer the version of Jimmy Olsen in Smallville or in Supergirl?
I'd have to go with Smallville personally because I'm not caught up on Supergirl. That was one I've not really gotten super into watching every episode. So I'm a little biased, but I'd have to go with Smallville on that.
Did you watch the
I'm gonna
first
say
season
Smallville
of
too.
Supergirl?
Hmm?
Oh, I'm sorry, Alfred. Ryan, did you watch the first season of Supergirl
Like
at
hit
all?
and miss, like an episode here or there, but I couldn't remember most of it, to be honest.
The big, tall, bulky dude, the black gentleman who was like Kara's best friend, along with Win, he was James Olsen. He was
Uh,
Superman's closest friend.
I'd probably have to rewatch it.
He was really, really good. Alfred, you said you liked Smallville too.
Only just because I haven't seen Supergirl, so I don't know. But I can see where they could take a character from one series and maturify them, if that's a good word I can use, and
Mhm.
make them for their own purposes. So if he has more usefulness or he's more of an important character in Supergirl, I can see him being a better character there than he was in Smallville. But I have a soft spot for him in Smallville.
So I enjoyed Aaron Ashmore's version of Jimmy Olsen in Smallville. I feel like he was comic book accurate, and he was what you expected from Jimmy Olsen, the photographer, the character. However, so I was biased going into Supergirl, and when I saw this guy, he's like, "Yeah, this is James Olsen." I'm just like, "Who is this big, bulky, beefy John Cena looking dude?" And it's just like, "Oh, that's Jimmy Olsen." He's like, he was Superman's closest friend, but he pretended to be a reporter so that people didn't actually know he had a relationship with Superman and knew who he was. So when he met Kara, he was looking out for her because he was Kal-El, he was Clark's friend, and Clark told him to look out for Kara. I really grew to like his version of James Olsen. It was much different from Smallville. Again, creative differences, creative liberties.
Yeah.
But he actually became a superhero in Supergirl with a shield and all this really cool stuff called Guardian with a mask on, and it was really, really cool. So I really enjoyed seeing that he was something more than just a photographer. Like being a photographer is what got his start, how he learned who Superman was and all of that. But then he moved to Supergirl's city. What the heck is it called? Um, help me out here. You've got
Star
Star
City,
City. No, you got Star City.
Metropolis.
Central City is Barry Allen, and then you've got Gotham, which is Batwoman and Batman, and then you've got
National City.
oh yeah, National City. Thank you. And so that's Supergirl's home, and what they did with her in the show, I felt like was pretty interesting because how it was explained, which was a little bit different than Smallville, was she crash landed. She was sent right after her cousin. Okay, accurate, same story. However, when she got out, her cousin she got knocked off course, her spaceship in space. So by the time she landed on Earth, her cousin had already grown up and become Superman.
Mm-hmm.
So now her story is she's not the one there to guide Superman, but it's mentioned that she was sent there to do that task. She was sent there to teach him and to help him because she was older than him. But because of the whole time anomaly and being knocked off course, it changed all of that. But they still stayed accurate with Supergirl stronger than Superman. And when they would get together, Clark would mention that he's just like, you're stronger than you think. You're even stronger than me. And the characters that they chose in Supergirl's show for the characters were honestly really, really well done. Like Windshot is the son of the toy maker, which is one of a really cool DC villain who creates toys and sends them off to go boom, 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 boom. But anyways, so in Smallville, back to our regularly scheduled program, what was your top 3 favorite characters?
That's a tough one.
I know.
So I'll have to go with Clark. Clark's number 1.
Okay.
Number 2 would be Lois because I had a huge crush on the actress when I was younger, and she's a badass character.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm gonna go off the page here and go with, I think he was supposed to be Doomsday, or he had like the that uh I don't remember exactly how it was, but he's popular. You mentioned him earlier, Nathan. Writers, Willers. Let me look it up really quick.
Huh?
But he was only in it for a short time. But I love that character. It kind of reminded me of like the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, because he was trying
Dr.
not to
Hyde.
be evil. He was a EMT at the time, and then he was Sam Witwer.
Oh, Sam Witwer. Yeah, I loved him. He was in the later seasons.
Mhm.
He was really great. I loved him, and he was in Supergirl as well. He actually played a villain, and he was very, very good at it.
He's an amazing
Sean.
actor and a huge nerd.
Well, dude, I mean, he's literally Starkiller from The Force Unleashed. Like that's who it was CGI'd after. So he's fantastic. And it's funny too because in Smallville, again, Jensen Ackles and Jared Padalecki both showed up. Jensen Ackles had a longer run than Jared Padalecki. Jensen played the assistant football coach and a love interest for Lana, but Jensen Ackles' character, his mother was like this ancient ancestor of people who hunted down Lana's ancient ancestor, who was a witch. Lana had discovered that while she was in Italy from this artifact, and that was how she got the tattoo on her back, the sign that matched one of the symbols in the caves. So I actually really enjoyed that season. There was a lot of really interesting stuff that went on, especially with Lex and Lionel and their curiosity getting the better of them, and the kind of intertwining bickering between Lionel and Lex, which just never gets old. Okay, so those were year 3. All right. I like those choices. Ryan, how about you?
A tough one. I definitely think Lex Luthor, just his internal struggle throughout the entire show, puts him as one of the top ones for me. I have to agree with Alfred that Lois Lane was one of my favorites, especially as far as like the female characters went throughout the entire show. Um, Lastly, I'd probably be torn between Martha and Jonathan Kent. With the way they told Jonathan Kent's story, which we touched on earlier, I definitely think he was a pivotal. And again, the fact that we don't relate to Superman as Superman, I do think the way they told this story and made him more relatable and all of the tragedy he went through was more relatable than a 10-minute snippet in a movie that explains his backstory and then you go to him as an adult. I think that connection is there. So between the two of them, probably leaning Jonathan Kent, but again, Martha was such a pivotal role for longer in the show too. So I
Yeah.
probably split on those two for my third vote.
That moment when you realize Kevin Costner is Jonathan Kent in the DC universe and could have been such a good Jonathan Kent if they would have left him alive, but
Mhm.
no one remembers because he was literally just, like I said, Jonathan Kent's character is always just like first 5 minutes of the movie, Clark Kent, little farm boy, rescued by the Kents. Oh no, Jonathan Kent's killed in a tornado that sucks up a truck and blah blah blah. And yeah, anyways, it was just I really really liked. Uh, it's funny because I'm pretty sure his name was John Snyder. Like the actual actor's name was John, and he played John, which made it even more ironic. Um, but Ryan, you chose 4 characters, right? You said Clark,
Yes,
Lon, or Lois, and that. Okay,
just because those two would
Al-
be split for my third.
Alfred, do you have a 4th character that you'd like to throw in the mix?
Oliver Queen. Oliver Queen.
Shocker. For those of you listeners who don't know, Alfred's favorite DC character is the Green Arrow. So big shocker there. Saw that one.
Boo.
All right, you know what? I'm going to be generous and I'm going to give you guys one more character. If you had a 5th and final one, you had to choose as a honorary mention. Who would it be?
Oh, maybe Brainiac since that was my favorite season.
Okay.
I'll say Lex.
Okay. And I guess that leaves it to. So, my top 5 favorites. Number 1, Lex Luthor. Hands down, Michael Rosenbaum's portrayal of the character was just every turn, every corner. I was waiting to see what he was going to do next. I never felt that way about Lex Luthor before I had watched Smallville. I always loved him as a villain, but I never really had the opportunity to understand him on a human level, to see that he had emotions. He wasn't just this mindless zombie that he's made out to be so much of the time. He was just like evil, kill Clark, kill Superman, blah, blah, blah. So number 1 was Lex Luthor. Number 2 was Clark. I loved Tom Welling's portrayal of Superman. Across the board, amazing. Every single emotion, every single version of Kryptonite that he was on, he was just phenomenal. Number 3 for me is Lionel Luthor. John Glover's portrayal of the character was phenomenal, and I really grew to actually care about him on a deep emotional level when he became the vessel for Jor-El and started being more on the Kent side. So I really enjoyed that. Number 4 for me is Lois. She was just phenomenal, and I love the actress that they picked to play her. I thought she was just across the board. She might actually be the best Lois Lane um, across the board. If I was going to pick another one,
I could see that.
The gal who played Lois in the Superman movies, the new one, she actually was really really good. I liked her, but for me, Smallville's Lois was just every part of her was just built the way I feel the character should be portrayed.
Mhm.
And then for me is Oliver Queen, the Green Arrow. I really love Justin Hartley's portrayal of the character, the tech and gadgets that he had, and just his addition to the team, especially in the later seasons. It was really good. So those are my 5 favorite from Smallville. So I'm kind of
It's
on board.
such a hard question too, because like the cast that they chose and the actors that, even if they were a no name at the time, they did such a great job
Yeah.
at portraying these characters.
I think
Yeah.
it kind of launched a few actors' careers, at least in TV. Having done that show, were able to go on and have more successful career after it.
Jensen Ackles for one. Right after that, he launched Supernatural and played Jensen Dean Winchester for 15 years. So that literally that season of Smallville was 2005, which was right when Supernatural came out. So that I think sparked definitely. I think he was probably already in consideration for the role, but I think after they saw him act in a type of environment where you're dealing with powers and things like that, I think that was probably a big start for him. Tom Welling, I feel like he's such an underrated actor, and Smallville was all people really just think about when Tom Welling was like, oh yeah, Clark Kent from Smallville. So when I saw him as Kane in the Lucifer show, I was like, hey, this is really cool. Finally, something else that he's in that I haven't seen him for so long. You know?
I think he was in a movie, but he has a podcast with Lex where they talk about Smallville, and he's had a very negative take on Smallville because he was typecast. That's all people ever knew him as. But I think he's come to some extent appreciate it because he did do the cameo for you said it was Supergirl, right? He did, or what did he do the cameo for?
All the Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was
Okay.
all the shows together. Yeah.
But I still think he kind of has like a sour taste from that time, which is kind of sad because he did such an amazing job, which is why we remember him for that.
Yeah, 100%. Like, if I was remembered for something that I did that people loved that much, that's what they remember me for, then like awesome. Like I could understand why that actor who just recently passed away, like a couple days ago, the dude who played in the Hunger Games. You know who I'm talking about?
No.
All right, I'm gonna look it
Yes.
up here. I'm gonna
Uh,
look this up right now because I'm not gonna.
I didn't hear about this. That's why I'm.
Yeah, so the Donald Sutherland.
okay. Yeah. Kiefer Sutherland's father.
Yeah, exactly. He's a
But
legendary actor.
yeah, I was gonna say he had a huge career prior to that, but I guess and being known for that role as of the last 10 years.
That's when they writ the obituary. There's like, Donald Sutherland, Hunger Games actor, and people were just like, seriously, Hunger Games? That's what you're gonna name him that he's remembered for? Like, what? That'd be like if you said Kiefer Sutherland, survivor, designated survivor. You mean 24 as Jack Bauer? Like, come on, people. But anyways, it's so I think Tom Welling being remembered for Smallville, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, mostly because of the fact that's really one of his only main roles that I've seen that I know him from. Sure, he's been in other stuff, just like Tobey Maguire and other actors who you know them for a certain role, but if you do a deep dive, you'll come to find out, oh, holy cow, they're in so much other stuff. And then you go like Hayden Christensen in Jumper with Samuel L. Jackson. Great movie. It's like the revenge of Mace Windu against Anakin Skywalker. That's what I think the movie has. Tangent, we're off topic. But
That's okay.
Smallville. I think that's pretty much.
Yeah, I don't have much else to say about it other than how much I enjoyed it and
Yeah,
have such good memories of it.
Yep. The redeeming factor in Superman.
100%. You won't get any arguments from me. And of course, anybody in the comments, feel free to jump in and argue with us or War of Nerds with us, and tell us why you think Smallville is either great or why it's not, and also let us know why you think Superman sucks.
And as a closing note to your whole Lex Luthor Smallville version is the best. I mean, you're forgetting Jesse Eisenberg, and I can't believe you would do that to such a
can see
great Lex Luthor.
while you're trying to spit those words out. I know you don't mean it.
Gene
And-
Hackman has always been my favorite Lex Luthor, but I will take nothing against Rosenbaum. Nothing against him.
Oh, Hackman's great, dude. Like,
Yeah.
that's old school, like Michael Reeves Superman, and you
Mhm.
look at that stuff, you're like, this dude is like OG, like comic book version of Lex Luthor with the suit and the tie, and he's walking around, oh, like, I've got kryptonite, I'm hunting down this Kryptonian alien, blah blah blah. He was good. He's old school version of what you would think of like a James Bond villain.
Yeah.
That's what Lex was back in those days. He was like a James Bond villain,
Mm.
but much higher maniacal. He's not like Robbie Coltrane's Valentine from, Eagle Eye. So, but I will agree that Gene Hackman is amazing. But for me, and I think because Michael Rosenbaum was on a podcast and even answered this question, he was on with Clancy Brown, and he was like, "You've played the role more than anybody else. You've had the longest amount of screen time as that character." And he's like, "Do you feel like that's why people connect to you so much?" He's just like, honestly, I don't know. He's just like, I did the best I could with the role and enjoyed the heck out of it.
Mhm.
And so yeah, honestly, like I love Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor. I think he did a phenomenal job. And I think Jesse Eisenberg, there's a special place in a dark pit somewhere for him to literally never ever play that role again.
Yeah.
I can't believe that they did that to the character in that movie. Just some snarky college wannabe basketball player who's just like walking around all like, no, never again. He should stick to the movies he knows. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed this presentation of a Smallville review, and please connect with us, shoot us some messages, whatever you'd like to do. As always, our beards will remain, or maybe they won't. Who knows?
Trimmed up, but it's still there.
Yeah, I might trim mine soon. We'll see. But until the next time, funky fantasy, the bowl, Stratosaurus, it's the war of nerds. See y'all next time.